Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming along today. In terms of some virtual housekeeping, I don't think you'll be able to speak directly through the webinar channel. However, there is a chat function, and you can raise your hand and type within the chat area if you have any questions. Cool. So, Neil, if you'd like to kick us off and go to the next slide, just to do some introductions. My name is George Jeannot, and I'm Fusion 5's Human Capital Management Account Manager. So that means I work with and support our customers in the payroll and HRIS, Human Resource Information Systems space. My role is really to help Fusion 5 customers get the most out of our HCM team. Got over 6 years experience managing key corporate relationships for companies in New Zealand and the UK, and since joining Fusion 5, I've worked with many of our HCM customers on their Holidays Act review and compliance projects. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Neil.
So Neil Gardner, I'm the consulting manager in New Zealand. Currently been Fusion 5 just over 8 years, I think it is now, but working with payroll, leave, HRMI systems for pretty much all my life, all my working life, I should say. So yeah, over the last sort of 5 years, we've been dealing with clients either with leave compliance, leave remediations, leave queries, and I've been dealing with a lot with MBIE mediations and also working with PwC and EY and Deloitte's on remediations alongside the client. So yeah, busy time, and it seems that every client we go to leave remediations, they discover something new. So we thought we'd do this today to teach you and be a bit preempt on some of the questions that people have been asking us now. So yeah. So today.
Thanks, Neil. So yeah, in terms of an agenda, the main take homes that we want to share with you today, really, number one, why should you care about the Holidays Act? Although I'm sure many of you already know. 5 key considerations or issues that we see as payroll and Holidays Act specialists time and time again in the leave projects that we've been working on over the years. We wanted to share with you what a sort of average leave review project has looked like within our customer base, as if you're planning a project of this nature or work in this space, you know, it's our hope that this may help you. And also, you know, how can we help as Fusion 5? We wanted to extend our knowledge in this space to some of our customers outside of our HCM pillar. And, you know, hopefully, if you are considering a leave review project, you will engage with us and want to learn a bit more about how we might be able to assist you. There will also be some time for questions at the end, or if you've got any questions, just to pop them in the chat channel. Cool. So before I hand over to Neil, I thought for those of you who are new to this space, I would quickly summarize the Holidays Act, which was not as easy a task as I thought. But yeah, so Neil, if you go to the next slide, please. So what is the Holidays Act 2003? And next slide. So the Act is a piece of New Zealand legislation governing the relationship between an employer and an employee. It has a broad scope, but crucially, it provides specific minimum leave entitlements and payments that must be met by New Zealand employers. Since passing into law, many who have interpreted the Act have found it to be ambiguous and complex, which it's a bit of an understatement to say has led to some challenges for many New Zealand organisations. So, you know, around 2016, it became clear that many organisations in the country had not been recording or awarding leave entitlements in line with the Act. And this sparked a raft of reviews and audits by MB and internally within many organisations across the country, which in turn led to some rather big remediatory payments being made to current and terminated employees, with many possibly still to be uncovered. Probably the most notable that's been in the media will be the New Zealand police, I believe remediating upwards to $30 million, which is obviously a very large figure. Now, it's important to note that Neil won't be covering all the potential compliance issues within the Act and considerations during this webinar, really only those relating to leave and other entitlements, as these are the areas that we have seen within our HRIS customer base that our customers have struggled on and that have come up time and time again, and that we wanted to, really highlight and share with others, be them Fusion 5 partners or customers. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Neil now, who'll just do a quick slide on some key acronyms to keep an eye out for, as there's lots of those within the payroll lexicon. And then Neil will run through our agenda.
Okay, so just to add to that, George, is the Act is easy to interpret if you were using the Act 50 years ago, where people were just working 9 to 5. Now we have flexible working conditions, people working variable hours, all different days of the week, different times, and that's where the Act has not changed, but people's lives have changed. There are a lot of working parties that are discussing the Act. It was on the agenda for the last 2 governments to review the Act. There is a lot of discussions on updating the Act, and it seems to be the only thing that's going to happen in the short term is they're going to give another week of sick leave or another 5 days of sick leave. So yeah, so that's probably where the Act is currently. So just really the key terms that we're going to talk about today is the common things that people refer to. AL is annual leave, and to pay annual leave you need to pay the hire of AWE, OWP or OWP4. This is very simplified, and the Act does talk about paying that. So BAPS leave, DBAPS leave, or BAPS-F as it can be known as now. So the change in it is the domestic family violence leave that's come through. So that was called D, and now it's F for family violence. So any of those 3 acronyms are what it's called. So AWE is the 52 weeks of gross pay divided by 52 weeks to get your average weekly earnings. That seems to be one of the main points, is that people don't store leave in weeks, but it needs to be calculated in a week to be compliant to the Act. So OWP is what the employee's ordinary weekly pay is. People that work variable hours, or do they have an ordinary weekly pay? And OWP4 can be used if you don't have an ordinary weekly pay. So there are a lot more, but they're sort of the main issue ones regarding payroll. So really, this is why we're here today, is why should I care? It's really, it doesn't go away if you're not doing it correctly. And we have seen and had a few clients that just assume a lot of things and don't put the time or effort into checking to see if they are actually compliant. So it is a legal requirement. You do need to pay people correctly and give them the correct leave entitlements. Most of the organisations we've dealt with have some area of non-compliance, whether it's a payment that they're not paying correctly, or they're not accruing correctly, or they're storing sick leave in hours, and really the Act says it should be in days. So some small, some very, very large. The longer you are non-compliant, then that can build up over time, and it can be quite a large remediation that you would need to deal with. The MB labour inspectors, they do come around to businesses and they do question how you have calculated something. There was an influx of the labour inspectors going through Pay Global because they had an ex-Pay Global person dealing with them, and they knew where it could be configured incorrectly. So we were dealing with those. Quite often it's said, well, just pay your staff a little bit more and that'll make it easier. Well, it's over compliant, but it's not correct to pay them. And most of the sayings is it's the systems can be compliant. It's how you've set it up and how you've entered the data to be non-compliant. So future proofing, from a payroll point of view, it isn't just set and forget. People's agreements change over time. Flexible working is probably the biggest one that's come through. What is an agreed week for them? The system will only calculate based on what the data is that's been entered previously. So if you don't have the correct data, then it won't calculate correctly, but the system could still be compliant that it's doing the correct calculation, but it doesn't have the correct data to do the calculation on. You need to check it constantly. Agreements change, collectives go through negotiations and change, and so then the system needs to be set up. You need to have the system configured. Future thinking, make sure the data that you're entering now can accommodate the calculations that you need in the future. Example would be if you don't have any part-timers, so you haven't been recording days worked because you don't need to use average daily pay, but all of a sudden you have some people going to part-time or variable hours, then you do need to start considering what you've been entering for those employees. The setup of the employee, how you've set them up and their agreed hours, agreed weekly hours, and payroll training, ongoing support for the payroll team to understand the Act. NZPPA do a very good payroll course and talk through the Act, and it's worthwhile keeping your payroll team up to date. So we'll just go through some 5 key compliance issues, considerations that we've dealt with over time, and there are a lot more, and there are variations of each of those depending on the client and how their employees are set up. So missing allowances from gross earnings. So to calculate someone's pay, you need all the allowances included. We'll go through these in more detail on the side. So incorrect calculation to work out weekly rates. Most people have leave in days or hours. That's that issue. Variable hourly workers. Really, you need to agree what a week is. So what is a week for every employee you've got in your organisation? Missing timesheets or corrections to pays. How is that processed through? So that's more of a process thing rather than a system. And recording of days or data for part-timers and that. They're probably the 5 main ones. There are lots more. These are just ones we go through. So missing allowances from gross earnings. This is just a simple example that we've sort of got, and these are different scenarios. So you set up all your allowances in your payroll system, and normally you would say whether they should be included into average weekly pay or the person's ordinary weekly pay to calculate those rates. So some of the examples would be if somebody always receives overtime every week, then that is part of their ordinary weekly pay, and then they should get at least that when they take leave. In this example below, if you're paying a bonus every pay, then it's considered ordinary and it would need to be included into OWP. But if you're only paying it and it's based on their employment agreements, because they have it stated, then it should be included into average weekly earnings. But if you're just paying a bonus because you feel like it, then it's not included. So pretty much you would need 3 separate bonus payments in your system, and payroll would need to know what type of bonus you're paying to those employees. So that does come down to the user that's entering it. So the system can be compliant and can be configured for those different bonuses, but then it depends which bonus you're entering. So that's the first one. Yell out if you've got any questions and we can go through, either put up your hand on that go to or unmute yourself and ask away. So I don't mind taking any questions if you go through as we go through. So incorrect calculation to work out weekly rates. Quite a few of the systems still do, but are changing to be more compliant, is that they would always divide the total gross earnings for the last 52 weeks by the hours worked the last 52 weeks to get an average rate. That can get you the right result, and it can be compliant if the person always worked those same hours every week. But if that person was to change from full-time to part-time, then they would not be correct. So saying you're compliant now can lead on to non-compliance later on. So you really need to divide their earnings by weeks to get a weekly rate. So just an example below. So you just need to divide total gross earnings by 52 weeks to get an average weekly. Then you need to divide that, oops, just press the mouse button. Then you need to divide that by what an agreed week is. That seems to be the most common issue, is that employers and employees haven't agreed with what a week is, and that affects both the payment and the accrual. So the Act says that you're entitled to 4 weeks of leave. What is a week? That needs to be agreed. So the next one is variable hour workers. So as I was starting to say, you need to agree with what a week is, whether you've got your annual leave in days or hours. Well, weeks would work. Some systems you can configure to have it in all three, and based on what the employee's agreed hours is. You also need to regularly review those hours to make sure the employee is still working those. I have questioned what is the timing for regular, and haven't had a definition of that, but you need to regularly review it. So you can't just blanket all your employees and say they're all set up as 15 hours a week, and then some of them might regularly do 30 hours. That needs to be changed, so that employee who's doing 30 should be their ordinary week of 30. So sort of a scenario would be if someone works 3 days one week and 4 days another week. Well, what is a week for them? You just need to agree what a week is, and then they would get 4 weeks of that week. So that's the agreement of what you've said to the employee, and that's what they would accrue, and that's how it works out what a week is. Okay, missing timesheets. It's quite common that if a timesheet is late, then that part of the earnings just gets put into the current standard pay and gets paid along with their normal pay. A couple of things that are incorrect with that is that it will incorrectly tax the person, because some of those earnings relate to a previous period, and they really should put those earnings into the previous pay, and then that previous pay would be retaxed and would work out correctly. Those earnings will also go into those 52 weeks and should be related to a previous 52 weeks. And if you're then paying a bonus payment, it works out what's happening over the last 4 weeks and could put the person on the next tax bracket. Very common scenarios of those is an employee starts and payroll aren't notified for 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden that person receives one pay of 3 weeks work. Well, that one pay shouldn't have 3 weeks, it should be 3 separate pays, as their 52 weeks would be wrong and their 4 weeks would be wrong, and any bonuses, all that, they would be wrong. So that's more of a process rather than a system, but that should be corrected. Okay, recording of days worked. If somebody takes BAPS leave, DBAPS leave, they're sick or they're taking a public holiday, they should be paid what they would have been paid if they had worked. So this includes allowances, and if the person has a variable pay during that period, then you can use ADP, which is just an average. You can't blanket all employees to pay ADP. That's quite a common one, is they just go, oh, we're just going to do everyone as ADP. If you know what that person's working and they regularly work those same hours, then you should be using RDP. Some clients will say, oh, I'm just going to pay the hire, and that's more of a cost to the client, and you can go through that. So an example would be if the employee doesn't work and everyone else in their same team works, and all of those employees work overtime, then should that employee that didn't work receive that overtime. The Act says that they should receive what they would have received if they had otherwise worked. So that is a just big discussion point at the moment around the different things. If the person receives an allowance because they work, and then you're putting them on sick leave and you're just paying them 8 hours of their ordinary pay, then they should receive that allowance that they would have been paid if they had worked, because that's what they would have got on normal day. So if you have people that are part-time variable workers, then you do need to start recording their days worked, so the system can work out their gross earnings divided by their real days worked to get average daily pay. So this means that if you have an employee that works 5 days and they come in and work on the Saturday, then you do need to be recording that 1 day as an extra day. Or if the person only works 4 days, then you need to record they only worked 4 days that week. This also leads on to the previous scenario where you might pay someone 3 weeks in one pay. Then you should have had that split and you should have been recording the days worked for each of those 3 separate pays. If you have salaried employees, then you know they work 8 hours and this is their normal pay, so then you don't need to use ADP. So then you don't need to record days worked. But if that person then becomes a part-time variable hours type person and you can't work out what a day is for them because you don't use rostering or you can't work out what they would have worked, then you would need to use ADP. And if you haven't been recording their real days worked for the last 52 weeks, the system won't be able to calculate it. So that's quite a common one, is they change someone to part-time or they get a few new part-timers in the system and all of a sudden the system's non-compliant because it doesn't have the data to work out what the days worked are going back into the history. So there are some of the main 5 points. There are variations of these that are causing people's headaches with the Act. Some other items to consider are changing an employee's agreed hours. They might go from full-time to part-time. Then you do need to adjust their leave balance if it's in days or hours. So somebody might have 20 days of leave and now they're going down to 2 days a week. Their leave balance should change to 8 days because the Act talks in weeks and that person only has they're entitled to 4 weeks. So a week to them was previously 5 days and now a week to them is only 2 days. So they've still got their 4 weeks of leave, which is now only 8 days. Not nice for the employee because they only see that they had 20 days and now they've got 8 days. And it works the opposite. So if someone went from part-time to full-time, then you should increase their number of annual leave days. Some systems do it automatically, some systems don't do it at all, and some systems ask if you want to recalculate the leave balance to do that. So that's quite a big one that's coming on the agenda at the moment. Leave without pay. A lot of people don't do anything for leave without pay, but they should be moving the anniversary or reducing the 52 weeks if it's more than 1 week. Or are they doing nothing at all? Close down period. If your employees only start and they don't have enough leave, are you paying out their 8% and then resetting their leave year? And that last bit, only if you close down for 1 month, that's not correct. Oops. It doesn't have to be for 1 month. Sorry, I was meant to remove that. What are you doing for parental leave or ACC leave? People working regular overtime, are you recording that as part of their ordinary pay or using 2 different overtime clauses for that? A few more items to consider. Any questions anyone want to ask? No? Okay. So here's a case study that we've sort of changed a few client names and generalized a little bit, but this is a sort of scenario that will happen to clients and what we work through. So Mike Mike's company. It should have been called Neil's company, but we'll call it Mike instead. So he had a query from MB. An employee thought they weren't being paid correctly, so they went to MB, and MB came back and says, hey, we want to get some information about this employee, make sure you're paying the person correctly, and they communicate that with Mike, and they would ask for that employee's previous leave history and earnings history and some extracts of that employee's timesheets and what they've been paid. So that caused an enforceable undertaking because he wasn't paying them correctly. We find from MB's experience that we've had, they are pretty good and pretty accommodating if you're proactive. If you're not being proactive, then they do enforce the undertaking and be a bit more, but that's just been generalized on what we've seen in the past. So Mike called his payroll company and they said their system is compliant. It does do the act correctly, and it's all down to how you've configured it or what data you've been entering. So then we were called and asked to, hey, can we help Mike and do a leave review of their payroll system to see whether they were non-compliant. So not so much on the system, but the data they were entering and their processes. So we worked with him and his project team. So that involved BAs, an external leave expert from another auditing company, and we worked through to make sure that the data they were entering, the system and the output were all compliant. So we wrote a document to identify these configuration issues and also our costs to fix the system, to reconfigure it to become compliant. Plus we do process mapping of the changes that the payroll or HR or timesheeting need to happen so that the correct data is being entered going forward. So as I said, we worked with the project team and the external auditors to make sure all the system was set up for test. We also needed to go back to MB to make sure that the configuration changes that we had done met that employee's query and that they had approved the change and we had complied with the enforceable undertaking. So Mike is a happy man and his payroll system and internal processes are compliant as at today. Tomorrow, if he doesn't keep on top of it and doesn't enter the right data or keep aware of changes, then it could become non-compliant again. So it is an ongoing thing. So then the next part of what we needed to do was do the remediation for these employees that hadn't been paid correctly. So what we did is we extracted all the data from his system and we ran a few SQL scripts and checked the missing data and bad data calculations, and then discussed on how we could create these back pay payments when the data was missing. So if you hadn't been recording real days worked and you had all these part-timers, then actually how could we calculate these part-timers' sick leave back 7 years ago? So it's part of the statements that come out are it's all in good faith, it needs to be discussed and agreed, and we did those changes in the SQL script calculations and then recalculated the employees' remediation payments. Part of the technical side of how that's all the hard work that we do is being able to reinsert those remediation payments back to those years where they were affected, and then any other leave that they'd been paid after that should have included that gross earnings, and then it's a snowball effect. So it can be that if a person's due $500 quite a while ago, then that $500 needs to add to the next 52 weeks. And if they've taken more leave, then that would increase that leave, and then ongoing. So it can be quite a big amount over a long period of time. So we confirmed with the MB that the calculation was correct. There's some missing data or bad data, then how do we get the best scenario to get that? And then we ran the script for current staff and pay them the remediation payment they're due, send them out their detailed explanation of how those payments were created, and then we also confirm with terminated employees and do the same script for them. So we've ticked that off, and it's all been signed off by EMF for the remediation. That is a very simplified version of it. The bit in the middle of working with their BAs and their technical people and getting the data can be difficult, but we have expertise and we have some great SQL scripts and databases that work through all that. So, and then we just did a ongoing training for payroll people to make sure the system is kept compliant, and we also offered to do a yearly review so that we can check that the system hasn't changed over time, or any other changes they've made are still making the system compliant. So hopefully that was a very quick case study of what we've done. So any questions for any of that information that you want to go through?
No, okay. Well, thanks, Neil. That was really good. Hopefully that provided some value to those of you on this webinar today. Feel free to sort of shout out or email us directly if you have any questions following that, and we'll send out a recording of this webinar as well. So just to finish us off, we're doing quite well on time. Just wanted to cover, how Fusion 5 can help. And I guess for those of you who are not familiar with Fusion 5, we're a technology company who support mission critical applications for over 900 customers throughout Australia and New Zealand. Our 470 staff work across many areas of business technology, as you will likely know, from ERP, managed services, Microsoft Azure, Dynamics CRM, all the way to our sort of area of the business, HCM, with our fantastic new Gemini HRIS solution, our Jade Star payroll solution. Neil's team also consult and support in the Pay Global space, and we also are doing more and more work with non-solution specific payroll customers, so consulting and helping in this sort of space with leave compliance projects to support customers that maybe aren't on our HRIS solution. And our HCM team, as we have touched on, and as Neil has hopefully demonstrated, have a great deal of experience within this space, built up over many, many years, working both with a vendor such as ourselves, but also in some of New Zealand's sort of largest organisations as payroll managers. And they've also been involved in many large leave projects. Now, if you go to the next slide, Neil. To help our customers, we've created an information document highlighting many of the key points Neil has touched on and more. And this is to help our existing HCM customers navigate this complex space, but also our non-HCM customers, as this is a challenge that affects many. Towards the back of this document, and I won't read through it, but as you can see here, we've sort of highlighted a few of the engagements and packages that we can help our customers with. And I guess sort of, how we can help could be summarized if you go to the next slide, Neil, by these sort of take homes. We work with organisations large and small, complex and simple, with Fusion 5 payroll or not. And we have supported and managed end-to-end leave projects for some of New Zealand's largest and complex organisations. But we have also consulted and worked on just one area of a leave project. So that might just be remediation. And we regularly work with our partners in the Big Four consulting firms, as there will often be a third party involved in these projects as well. We can help review historical data and create remediation reports to help boards understand leave liability. And again, as I've touched on, we've created a leave review document just to sort of help our HCM customers and non-HCM customers understand how we can help in this space. So yeah, I guess I hope this has been helpful for you. And I would really encourage you to touch base with your Fusion 5 account manager or myself if you'd like to learn more about how we could help in this space. And we usually would can set up a call to discuss sort of your review project with Neil and the team in the first instance. Yeah, so thank you all very much for attending. If you've got any questions, please type in the chat or take yourself off mute. Otherwise, I hope you all have a lovely day.